So what do you think of the new camera? Pretty swank, huh? We got a hold of a new camera and are improving the video quality just a little bit because I'll give you a sneak preview a few months from now when the new topics come out for both NCFCA and STOA and both Team Policy and LD. What we want to do is we want to hold some Google Hangouts to do some brainstorming sessions, and we'll have more details on that when those events approach. Today what I want to talk about is time allocation. And time allocation is a pretty fundamental skill that I think just about everybody learns in making it through the novice phase of debate. But what I find is a lot of debaters get to kind of the middle time of their career, the middle span developmentally of their career, and they have learned how to be efficient with their time. They've learned how not to bog down, how to keep arguments contained, and keep an eye on the clock. But that's the only thing they've learned. They've learned how to be efficient. And there are two other situations you can find yourself in where smart investment of time in a way that both maximizes your chances of winning and sends the right impression to the judge involves not really being efficient. It involves breaking out of that habit and doing something different. So I want to talk about both of those situations, both of those modes of thinking about time allocation, and that, I think, can help some people who are past the novice phase but wanting to make the jump to the next level in what to do to be kind of smart about investing the one most limited resource in debate, which is time. So the first way is there are some circumstances where I think you want to be dismissive. And let me tell a story to illustrate what I mean. When I was a fifth-year senior in college, and yes, it took me 5 years to graduate college, I came out of retirement for just one weekend because Baylor had one freshman. They'd had kind of a dry recruiting year, and they had one freshman who did very, very good in high school, but they didn't have a partner for him. So I went to a tournament with him, and because I was old and had no future in the activity, I decided I was going to have fun. And so every negative round, we went for topicality. I just hadn't done it very much in my career, and I wanted to do it to see if I had the chops to beat teams in the open division who'd been running their affirmatives all year on topicality. Well, in round 6, it was a 6-round tournament, and we were 5-0, and we were debating the other 5-0 team from the University of Oklahoma. It was the Reed brothers, Scott and J.V. Reed. And so Scott had been trying to get a debate team started at the University of Oklahoma, and now they have a very successful debate team, but back in 1991 they didn't have one. So it was just Scott and his brother. They had done the research themselves, and whenever they found themselves out of their depth, they would resort to some of the tricks that had worked very well when they were pretty successful high school debaters. So we ran our topicality argument, and Scott knew, because he had heard the buzz going around the tournament, that this was a very evidence-intensive topicality debate. We didn't just read one definition and then give a bunch of reasons to prefer. We made an argument that affirmatives just had it wrong on what a particular term meant, and we had 15, 20 cards we could read on the distinction to disprove their definition, to say their definition was simply not accurate. And so what he wanted to do is he knew he wasn't carrying evidence to defend his interpretation of that term. So in high school, what you do is you just dump a lot of ink on the flow. So he had a lot of affirmative counter standards. I want to say from my memory that he had between 12 and 16 affirmative counter standards. And back in high school debate, that would have worked. A lot of people would be intimidated, and they would think that even if they went through each of those and spent the time to answer them, there would be something that they messed up or undercovered, and that he would still have a loophole. Instead, the effect that had on me, being the old battle-scarred college debater that I was it made me mad. Not mad at him, and I didn't dislike him or anything, but I thought, oh, come on. Are you not going to debate us on the merits of this? You know, did I come out of retirement just to debate people on affirmative topicality counter standards? So our judge that round was Melissa Wade, the director of debate at Emory University. And I start off the 2NC, and I get to the top of the violation, or the top of the topicality argument. He's only made like 5 or 6 answers to the violation proper. He's got his 16 counter standards at the top. And I said, I am going to do my level best not to let this eat up time, because this is not where the debate should be happening. He says first, right to define, but we have the right to counter define. He says second, give leeway. No, if they can't defend their case as topical, they deserve to lose. He says third, justify limits, explain why the particular limit is necessary for debate. We did that. That's the CISA point in the first speech. And every argument that he made, I described it in the fewest words possible, and then had one fairly short argument. And it was beyond being efficient. I almost went too fast for her to get them written down. And she said after the debate that all she'd been able to do was write about one keyword for each answer. And then I got to the violation where he had his 5 or 6 evidence answers, and I said, this is where the debate is going to take place. This is where I've got explanations and evidence, and what I hope is from here to the end of the debate that they'll match us on this and not on the waste of time counter standards that are not where this debate should be happening. And then I, went on and explained the violation, explained why I thought our arguments were better, did evidence comparisons, and read a lot more evidence. So the end of the debate comes, and Melissa Wade reveals the decision, says that she voted for us, and she looks me right in the eye. She says, I hate topicality. I have always hated topicality. And I'm thinking, oh no. No, when I get this ballot back, I'm going to have like single-digit speaker points. But then she says, and forgive me, I did not tell this story to try to sound conceited, but it works for the point that I want to build up to. Then she says, but this, if more topicality debates were like this, I would love them. You did exactly right. You took a lot of the empty, tail-chasing, soundbite topicality debating, and you just brushed it aside. You didn't drop any of it. You didn't give them an opening to say this wasn't answered, but you gave it as much attention as it deserved. And you thus rhetorically positioned their arguments by being impatient with them. You shaped my impression of them, and then you had meat to your argument, and you made me think about the meat of your argument, and you almost scared them off going back to these arguments, which, they resorted to them because it's all they had, and I can sympathize with them for that, but you so controlled the impression that I formed of this argument that I loved it. And when I got the ballot back, she'd given me a 30. And that was one of, I think, only 3 30s I ever got the years I was in college. So that was, and from someone who's the head coach at Emory University, one of the great debate programs, that was an awfully fine moment. I tell that story to say what you sometimes want to do is you want to be dismissive. What you sometimes want to do with your time allocation when they make arguments, and it's a risk. It's definitely a gamble. I can imagine that there are coaches out there who are seeing this saying, my debaters do not yet have the round sense. They do not yet have the insight into how judges think to be able to discern between the arguments they can be dismissive of and the arguments they need to settle down and spend some time on. But I would say the trial and error to try to spot the arguments where you can be dismissive, where you can spend as little time as possible, and in so doing, that limited amount of time is an argument itself. If you can convey that you're unworried about the argument, that a quick 3 or 4 word explanation is all that it merits. If you watch really successful debaters at the top of the activity, I think you'll find that they do that a lot of the time. And they have the ethos, in some cases the reputation, but they have the track record of, if they give an argument that kind of short shrift, they can control how the judge will perceive it as well. So, beyond being efficient, sometimes I think what you want to do is you want to be dismissive. Now, separate from that, I find that a lot of debaters have a really hard time knowing when to go big. There's efficient, then there's dismissive, and then finally there's big. Now, big is where you take an issue and you want to beef up that issue and to overwhelm the judge with the quality of your development of the argument. It's something that you should be doing in your last rebuttal. It's something that on the negative you ought to very often do in the negative block, because one of the best weapons you have is you have that big lump of time in the middle where you do have the luxury to develop an issue. It's something that in Lincoln Douglas you want to do in your longer speeches, in your constructive and in your rebuttal. You want to get big. You do not have to be as efficient as the affirmative has to be with the shorter speeches, and so you want your arguments to be prominent and memorable, and you want to do such a good non-redundant job of developing them that the issue itself seems overwhelming to the judge, and that the affirmative, by contrast, seems as though they really just did not get into the substance nearly as much. Now, that's easier said than done. One of the words in my description just now was non-redundant, and what young debaters will very often do when given the opportunity to get big is they'll just repeat themselves. They'll describe the argument, then they'll describe it again, varying their verbiage a little bit, and then they'll describe it again. And really, I think something that ought to be happening when you do practice speeches or practice rounds is you should have certain practices set up where your objective is to try to keep developing the argument without repeating yourself. A drill I very commonly give my own debaters is, I want them, and this is an IPDA debate, which is chiefly the format that we do here, I want them to start off the last rebuttal, first of all, having selected the one issue that they think they are farthest out in front in, that they win the debate on, having described it in the boldest terms they can. There's a formula then I tell them, their only answer is, which is where you talk about what your opponent said and why it's not sufficient. Then you go on in the most vivid and concrete terms you can to flesh the argument out a little bit more, and then you say, and this wins us the debate because. And what I do is I have them try within that framework to take where they think they are furthest ahead, where they have the best shot of winning the debate. I have them try those steps at the beginning of their rebuttal in practice rounds, and then I will give them tips on how to make it even bigger, on things that have occurred to me, details they ought to include, descriptions, examples from earlier in the debate, examples from history or from current events that pop into my head, hypothetical examples that they can use to make whatever argument they're going for seem as vivid as possible. So, you do want to be efficient. It is important in most situations that you know how to spend sufficient time on an argument but not get bogged down. There are also times when you want to go beyond efficient to be dismissive. There are times, not only in the last rebuttal, but also in the negative block, in the negative speeches in Lincoln Douglas, sometimes even in extemporaneous speeches or apologetic speeches. There are some issues you need to be efficient with and address but not get bogged down on. There are some issues that you'll mention in passing and be dismissive of, and then there'll be some issues where you're on your own ground, where you really have good quality information material that came out of your files, and you feel very comfortable explaining it, and without letting it take over the entire speech and running out of time, you want to get big on it. Really, it's kind of a sensibility that the more you experiment in your practice rounds and your practice speeches with, is this a place to be efficient, to be dismissive, or to go big, you get more of the instinct for what's the appropriate moment for each of them, and you also get experience in doing it effectively. So that's a skill set that I think you ought to be incorporating into your practices, so you don't think of time allocation simply as a matter of word economy and not running out of time, and you know that there are a lot of things you can do that position you strategically depending on how smart you are about your time usage.